This is Richard Wolff with a response to an AskProfWolff question from our Patreon community. This question comes from John Jarecki, and it's a really good question about the relationship between the coronavirus on the one hand and the stock market drops and gyrations on the other. John asks whether the coronavirus is the cause of all the turmoil in the markets or whether it's a convenient scapegoat. So let me get right to the nub of the question as I understand it. There are dozens, more than dozens, of reasons why the stock market is in a very dangerous place. And my view is that almost anything could set off the long overdue correction. That's the polite word that people on Wall Street use, a correction, as if the stock market has misbehaved and is now going to be corrected. This misbehavior is in fact the regular way capitalism works. For the 300 years that system has been growing and becoming dominant now over the whole world, capitalism, wherever it is settled, has had an economic downturn every 4 to 7 years. Sometimes they're long and hard and deep. Other times they're short and shallow. But they're always there. The average is 4 to 7 years. Sometimes it's a little longer. Sometimes it's a little shorter. 4 to 7 is the average. In other words, this system has a built-in instability that is stunning and has been the focus of criticisms of capitalism from its beginnings. Well, the last time we had a downturn in the U.S. economy was in 2008 and 9. So we are overdue because it's more than 4 to 7 years. It's closer to 10 years since we've been in the last one. So we're overdue. Things have gotten kind of weird in the market, and so anything could set it off. The coronavirus could be the stimulus that sets it off. The collapse of oil prices over Sunday and Monday of this week is another example. And there are many more. Any kind of health crisis, war breaking out, conflict here or there, collapse of a government. For example, the government of Lebanon is on shaky grounds. The government in Italy is on shaky grounds, and so on. The coronavirus certainly plays a role. Here suddenly is exposed the failure of a capitalist system to protect its own people. On Tuesday, March 10th, Business Insider, a mainstream financial source of news, carried an important graph. It showed that while in South Korea, up until March 8th, there had been 3,000 or 4,000 tests for the coronavirus per million of their population. In the United States, as of the same date, March 8th, the total number of tests was 5 per million. That is stunning. That is a failure of a country that has known for weeks that this is a serious problem, to be able to take the steps needed. Our pharmaceutical companies hadn't produced the tests in the quantities we need. They hadn't stored them where they would be available quickly in the quantities we need. The tests are available. German companies produced a good one that the World Health Organization says works well. Everything is there, but it doesn't work. What we need for our safety is there, but it doesn't work. But the story gets worse. Hundreds of millions of people in America, we only have 300 million, either have no health insurance or they have a health insurance that has a deductible that people don't want to spend because it's money out of their pockets. So they don't go to a doctor when they don't feel well. They wait until they're much sicker. But right now, that could be deadly for our country. Then we have millions of people who don't work at a place with paid sick leave. So if they go to see a doctor, it costs them lost income. And so they don't go. But we need them to go. In South Korea, the government immediately declared the government will pay anyone's fees to go and get tested. Go and get tested so we know who we got, what the problem is, and how to solve it. Mr. Trump and his government haven't figured that out yet, have they? Not as of the day I'm speaking, and we're seeing everything close in America. We're so terrified, but we can't have an economic system, apparently, that works to prepare. Amazing. Amazing. The medical industrial complex, the companies that make the drugs and medications, the companies that run the hospitals, the doctors, the insurance, they can't work it out so that we have a country ready to handle this kind of a crisis. You may not be able to prevent the mutation of the gene, but you certainly can prepare for it. But if you're interested in profits first, you won't. You won't make the kits if there isn't a demand for them. You won't store the kits if there isn't a demand for them. The government won't make sure you do it because the government has been captured by the medical industrial complex long ago. So here we sit. The coronavirus exposes the failures of this economic system to keep its people safe. And you want to know what the greatest danger to the stock market is? It isn't the virus. It isn't even the oil shock. It's the thinking of the people on Wall Street as they begin to look at this virus and see the unpreparedness of the American system. They can see the universities closing down, the airlines emptying out. They can see that economic disaster is coming our way. Recession, depression, no one knows, as they never do, exactly when it will hit and how deep it will cut and how long it will last. But what we know and what the investors have figured out is an economic system overdue for a downturn, puffed up with levels of debt it cannot accommodate, has no space for a crunch, for a downturn. In other times and conditions, we could have gotten through it. This one, nobody knows. And that very fear and that very wondering holds back investors, makes them sell stocks. So it's the system, in the end, destroying itself. Capitalism no longer works for the mass of the people. If it ever did, now it is such a failure that the only real question is, how could we have tolerated this long, and how can we tolerate it another minute? This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work, thanking our Patreon community for the participation, the engagement, and the very good questions.